Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse, and in today's segment I'm joined by Maine Prepper. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for showing up.
What we're going to do today is a fire starting video for you guys, sort of fire starting 101. And in order to avoid too many cooks in the kitchen, I'm going to run the camera and Maine Prepper is going to do our practical demonstration and lecture format for this video. Awesome, being our subject matter expert resident here today.
Pressure's on.
Pressure's on. Now, some things that we should cover down on before we get started. Safety. Maine Prepper, take it away.
Yes. First of all, be aware that fire does spread, and it is often, what is Washington once said, government like fire makes a dangerous servant and a cruel master.
Yeah.
So you don't want the fire to get out of hand. You want to be in charge of the fire at all times. That means keep your eye on it, watch it like a hawk, and don't expect it to just burn out on its own. So before you get started, make sure you have the methods and the means to put a fire out should it quickly spread away from the area you're trying to operate in. Secondly, you want to be able to make sure that when you leave the fire completely out. Don't start the woods on fire, even in a non-survival situation, because in a survival situation, if you start the woods on fire, you may very well perish, or if you're trying to hide, that's definitely going to give your position away.
Just don't start the woods on fire.
Please.
General disclaimer, don't do that.
Please, we don't have that many left.
That's true. That's true. Okay, very good. So you're going to do the practicals. I'm going to run the camera. Let's get started.
One other thing on safety, though.
Oh, well, okay.
Your end of the safety perspective.
Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot to tell you guys. Yes, Patriot Nurse here, designated medic, got the medical kit nearby, so in case, God forbid, we should have any mishaps, we're ready.
That's right. And make sure you have some gloves. I don't have gloves with me today, so I'm going to be extra careful, but it's always a good practice to have gloves when you're making a fire.
Okay, now are we ready to go?
Now we're ready to go.
All right, go.
I'm going to show you today how to make a clandestine fire, or somewhat clandestine. And no fire is perfectly clandestine because there'll always be smoke and the odor of it. But what you want to do is minimize the amount of smoke and the amount of odor, as well as the amount of flame. So to do that, we need to pick the right materials. Hardwoods make a better fire. They're not only hotter and a little bit easier to start, but they make less smoke and a little bit less odor. So when we go out and we look at the trees, we look at the leaves, and you look at the bark. Now this is a coniferous tree or a spruce type tree, which is not the kind of tree we want to be burning. But we are going to make our fire near this. And in order to start the fire, we're going to first go out and we're going to find good dry wood. What does dry wood sound like? Usually it's hanging on the tree, and when you grab it and you break it, it makes a snap. Okay, when you have a snap, that's a good dry piece of wood. If you pick the wood up and it does that and it crumbles in your hands, that's a little too wet and rotten. Conversely, we don't want to get something that's very green, so that when you go to bend it, it doesn't even want to break. Okay, it just kind of tears in half and sort of hangs on there like that. That's a piece of green wood, so we don't want to use green wood. Green wood and this pulpy wood are definitely going to make a lot of smoke. Same thing goes with pine needles. You want to avoid pine needles if you can. What we're going to do first is you're going to get all your wood together. You don't want to start a little fire and then run around and try to find the wood that you're going to need to make the fire. And for today, we're going to make a very small fire. So the largest piece of wood that we're going to burn is going to be this piece right here, and that's about it. And this piece here is probably a little bit rotten, but it's just barely on the borderline of usable, so it's still got a little bit of crack and snap to it, and so this is going to be good enough. And that's the biggest pieces of wood we're going to burn. So before we begin, we get our wood and we start breaking it up into graduating sizes, and we start down with this very, very small wood, which is basically a little bit smaller than a matchstick, and this is what we're going to use to actually start the fire with. We're going to start with this and we're going to build up. And there's a number of methods you can use. You can use a TP fire, you can use anything else. I just sort of pile the wood on. That way I can slowly control the size of the flame, and I can also control how much smoke I've got going up into the woods. So I am actually in a position where the smoke's going to be blowing on my body, and that's good in a sense. So let me go ahead and start. I've got my handy dandy tactical pink cigarette lighter here in my pocket, and we'll start with that. So you want to get out of the wind, and what I've done is I've dug a little space. Now this is not Boy Scout or fire safety approved, but for tactical purposes and also for hiding, you don't want to dig away 25 feet in every direction all of the forest floor. So I've got just enough here, and I've set this aside, the topsoil that goes back on here. When I finish, I can bury this and cover the area up and make it look like perhaps I wasn't here. Getting this small piece started is going to take probably the most amount of effort, and you're going to have to hope that you've got some good dry wood, and if not, it's not going to burn for you. Now with this little bit going, I want to make sure that I have my next wood ready to lay over the top. And what we're doing is we're building and we're graduating up in our fire size. We're putting a little bit larger wood on top of the smaller wood. And you don't want to let your fire starve. You don't want to smother it, nor do you want to let it starve. You want to very carefully tend it when we're first starting. And we're getting a little bit of smoke here that we perhaps don't want, but this should get a good little blaze going. And we have to understand that heat travels upward. So the heat from the bottom is traveling up into this wood on top. And we've got now the next size of wood, which is a little bit larger than a pencil, that's going to go on here. And keep in mind, when you first start out, you're a little bit smoky. So the smoke is traveling up, but because I'm right at the base of the tree, the smoke is dissipating before it gets up too high. Smoke is also rising straight up, so I'm not worried about people smelling my fire just yet. And I just continue to add wood, graduating up in size. And I don't necessarily have to use all of my wood to get this going. I can start with what I have. Once the fire gets going really well, you're going to see that the smoke dissipates. And that's because I've chosen some very dry wood on purpose. I'm going to burn some green wood here in just a minute, and I'm going to show you the difference when we throw some of the green wood on here. It makes a tremendous amount of smoke. Now, we've had a good deal of rain this summer up here, and so it's really hard for us to find wood that's not too smoky, smoke producing. Everything's a little bit wet up here. And the wind's drifting around a little bit, so I'm going to have to move. What was that they used to say when I was a Boy Scout? Smoke follows beauty. Well, I never really wanted to be beautiful, but prefer to not be smoky. You have to be very mindful of the smoke that you're making as you're doing this. And so the smoke is dissipating up into the trees, and that's good. If I made this fire at night, the smoke would not be as visible. However, the flame would. And if I was going to make this fire at night, I would dig the hole much, much deeper so that no one would be able to stand off at a distance and to see the smoke or to see the flames. And remember, we have not cleared the forest floor away, so I have a responsibility to sit here and watch this. Even though everything's wet out here, there's still a potential that as this fire gets good and warm, and it's getting warm, I'm starting to sweat. As this fire gets good and warm, it's going to start drying up some of the forest floor, and that's when we have a danger of starting a fire. But I'm not worried about this tree catching on fire right now. However, if the limbs were a little closer down and they had a lot more dried pine straw on them, I would be definitely worried about the heat, because the heat, right now I hold my hand this high above the fire, and I can feel it hot enough that I almost need to move my hand out of the way. And you can in fact see the heat shimmer, I think, through the camera. The fire can be just to build everybody's morale. It can also be to heat some water up, or maybe heat some food up. You have to carefully consider if you're going to make a fire, and believe me, if you don't need a fire, don't make a fire, because a fire makes smoke, it makes an odor, and it also makes a light. So those are three things that are violations of your noise and light discipline when you're out in the woods and you're trying to hide. That said, if you're going to freeze to death or be caught, well, you might as well go ahead and make a fire. But you don't want to necessarily make a fire where you're going to get caught. Keep in mind also that when the fire burns down, even though it may not be a flame anymore, it is still capable of lighting the woods on fire. And you can see the flame is starting to hit this tree as the wind blows against it, but it's not going to catch the tree on fire and ignite it because the bark on here is still quite green and wet. The tree probably not as happy about getting this fire made right next to it, but you can see, if you can pan the camera upward now and look, there's no smoke, but any smoke that we did have would be traveling up against the base of the tree all the way along the trunk and being dissipated through the limbs. So this fire, now that it's going the way it should, there's no smoke in it because it's all dry wood. And that's why you want to use dry wood. Now let me show you what happens when we throw some green stuff on there. And I've gathered a handful of this pine straw. And this is a mistake people sometimes make, is they start to run out of wood, so they just grab anything that'll burn and they start grabbing stuff off the forest floor. And you can see that I'm starting to make a lot of smoke. This is all basically pine straw. And so you see how much smoke this is making. That's not a good thing, A, and B, it's making a lot of smoke. And there's a definite odor that comes with burning it because it's got some dirt in there and it's got some green material. So don't throw green stuff on your fire. Tenderfeet will always do that. That's what we used to call you in the Boy Scouts when you didn't know your way around the woods, tenderfoot, because you had never been for a walk in the woods apparently. Don't throw pine needles on the fire. They burn quick, but they make a lot of ash and a lot of smoke, and a lot of flame does not necessarily mean a good hot fire. Now if you'll notice on the side of this fire over here, I'm starting to get a little bit of spread as the forest floor starts to dry out. So all I got to do is push that back and put the fire out. This is part and parcel to me shoving all of these pine needles into the fire for demonstration purposes, but that's okay. If you have a fire going and you're not sure of where and how far the smoke is traveling, what you want to do is maybe have somebody else, your battle buddy or your partner out in the woods, walk concentrically larger circles away from the fire, and they'll be looking for smoke and smell as well. And you can get an idea of how far your smoke is traveling that day. You want to make sure when this fire burns down and you're ready to leave, if you have to evacuate quickly, just go ahead and run away, because if somebody's coming, they've already spotted your fire. Don't worry about that. But when you do leave, you want to make sure that you cover your tracks the best you can. Keep in mind that if they have a good tracking team or if they have dogs with them, they're going to find where the fire was. But you don't want to leave any evidence of how many people were in your party or anything else that would be giving away intelligence about you, such as whether you had a lot of food or not. All right, so this fire was burning really well until I threw all the pine needles on there. So if you go camping with me, don't be the tenderfoot throwing pine needles on my fire, because you'll mess it up. So this is basically our fire, and it's starting to burn down. It got a little smoky because for demonstration I threw some pine needles on there. But one of the things I thought we should add is having a pair of gloves handy. Because if you get a burn, even a minor turns into what?
Major.
That's right. And so you want to make sure that you don't add work to your resident medical person, in my case today the Patriot nurse. But for today I did not have gloves on, so I violated my own safety rules there. Anything you can think of?
Yes, but if you will teach your children to identify hardwood versus coniferous wood, and also give your children the task of finding the squaw wood. That's what I grew up calling it, but of giving your children the task to find the squaw wood. It gives them something practical to do that keeps them occupied, and also if it isn't a disaster or survival situation, giving a child something proactive to do helps to increase their sense of control over their circumstances, but it also helps to keep them occupied, and children who are occupied are less likely to be complaining and also less likely to be afraid. So giving them something practical to do, like going to fetch more wood, is a really neat thing, especially if this is your family that you're going with.
That's actually a good point for anybody in your group, because people will get lost, and if they get left to their own thoughts too much, then they'll start to get despondent and to despair, because it's a new surrounding, it's a new situation. it's pretty much assumed that if you've abandoned things and you've run out into the woods to survive, you're not out here camping and having a good time. So you need to keep everybody happy, productive, and occupied, especially the kids, but also your adults.
Yeah.
Good point.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Maine Prepper. Thank you for being our subject matter here and for letting me run the camera.
Oh, thank you for running it. And did you bring the organic mushrooms? I mean, the organic marshmallows.
Yeah, perhaps so. Yeah, well, mushrooms or marshmallows, both of them would be good times.
Yes,
No, I'm kidding.
portobellos.
Portobellos, yes, for sure. Okay, guys, thank you so much for being with us on our fire starting video today, and thank you, Maine Prepper, again for being here. And for now, let's Patriot Nurse sign off. And
Maine Prepper.
All right,
Long live the Republic, folks.
we'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Heavy metal construction. Da, 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 da.
Now, when this battery runs down, I'll run
Okay.
it down to the house, put it on the
Okay.
charger, and then...
Wah! What is
Yeah.
that?
Saw. Circular saw.
Oh,
Cutting through some heavy wood with a dull blade. It's Black & Decker. Red. Grasshopper.
grasshopper. Young Padawan.
That's right.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Get in the freaking frame. There we go. Okay. Ready?